Hello, everybody. I'm going to encourage you, obviously, to keep eating and enjoy your time. It is, as always, a gift to be able to speak with you all today. And like Winnie and like many people have spoken about this book, this is a book that has spoken a great deal to me. And I'm not often good at following the rules, so the soup and scripture part, I missed that last bit. Yeah, I know that's embarrassing, isn't it? So I don't have any scripture for you, or maybe not. Perhaps, though, I have some that feels a lot like scripture in my soul. And so I want to tell you a little bit of a story, and it's one that has come up as a result of beginning to interact with this book. And I've pulled a few things out of the book along the way to help us. And of course, as I talk, one of the things I want to do is encourage you to talk as well, for those of you that have seen me do this song and dance a little bit already. So there are going to be some moments in this time that I ask you to reflect together, and I'm going to give you some time to do that. I'm going to ask you to do that at the context of your table as that small group, and I'm going to go ahead and give you permission to be as open in your conversation as you'd like to be, with the foreknowledge of, I'm not going to ask you to share any of it out loud. So what you talk about at your table is truly part of your experience, and I hope that today will open up some space for you. The world was made gorgeous, tender, broken, dangerous. We know not why. This is, to me, at the very beginning of this book, a really beautiful reflection. And it's what brought me into the book, a book that maybe at the beginning of its hype I didn't want to take quite so seriously. And then from the first words, they had me. Lent is a season, I think, where most of us spend time reflecting on our life and on what it is that we are doing in our daily life, how our spirituality, how our religion, how our theology interacts with who we are, who we've been, and who we are yet to become. I know that this has been my journey so far through this Lent, and I'll admit to you that Lent is not something that I'm particularly good at in the life of church. The idea of giving something up has always been a challenge to me. I tend to start it really strongly, and then within the first week or so, sort of move away from that. Along the way, I decided at some point that maybe instead of giving something away, because that felt like a step too far, I would take something on. That was pretty popular some years back. I was really good at that for about a week as well. So there was clearly something that didn't make sense to me. The thing that has always proven true is that Lent is a time for me that when a story pops up, when I'm thinking about something, that when I'm at a very healthy point in the day, I like to pause and give that thought some space to sit with it. And so that is what I have done with this book. And I want to start by saying maybe a little bit of a warning for you. You know, many times in church, details of our lives and how we came to be as priests are not particularly shared fully. We do that in theory for the purposes of helping us and you to think. Today, I'm going to take a little step further into some detail of my own story because that's what's with me. And so I want to warn you a little bit about that because to some of you, that may be there may be some details in this story that are a little bit hard to hear and a little bit hard to take in, or something that you find yourself going, either I just don't understand that, or I get that totally. Whatever it is that you feel, I'm going to invite you to do that. If at any time in what I have chosen to share today you feel uncomfortable in any way, know that I will not be offended if you need to take a break. So feel free to engage as you are. What I want to tell you about is, I think, wrapped up in this quote. The world was made gorgeous, tender, broken, dangerous. We know not why. Many people find their way to the Episcopal Church from other faith backgrounds, and I certainly did the same. Along the way in my journey, there were lots of points where there were questions that I had about my own faith background, who I was taught to be, who I learned to be, and how to interact with God as a Southern Baptist. But of course, as a gay man in South Louisiana, that was a very difficult place to exist, particularly in the place that was meant to be community most. So I'll fast forward, but let's just say we can start with the understanding that there were some real challenges that I had, some real questions about how I was to be and what community really meant. Along that way, what I discerned through my vocational life, which began in a secular world and commodities and banking and all sorts of things that many people find boring, that I found just so engaging in every way, things I still enjoy today, I discerned a call to ordained life, to the priesthood. This was after years of what I called wandering time, a time where I intentionally didn't engage with the church of my foundation, but also didn't engage with really any church at all until I walked into a food kitchen that was supported by an Episcopal church and was given the opportunity to start cooking food for people and to engage with an Episcopal priest who was annoying enough to keep showing up, to keep asking questions about why I showed up, and to have absolutely no answers for me, which was a very new experience. These were the people that invited me to go to seminary. And for any of you that have looked into that or listened to very many priests talk about it, seminary is a particularly challenging time for many of us. The way it was described to me was when we go to seminary, we go to a place where someone with some boundaries will help break down everything it is that we think we believe, give us more information, and then help us begin to put things back together. The way I think about that is they help us learn how to think, how to ask questions, how to dig more deeply. And so that's what I did with colleagues at my seminary. And throughout that time, what I learned is that the person that I was as a child had never really left me. That I was still, at my core, that same kid that had questions, the same kid that didn't feel exactly like I had fit in. And part of the reason that I was in seminary was to explore that, to think about the way that that interacted with who God was calling me to be, not who I had been, but who I was called to be. Along that way, one of the things that felt very important to me was that I needed to spend some time trying to rebuild and repair relationships, in particular with my biological family and the people that saw me as very different and created lots of reasons for me not to be in community with them. I thought that this would be part of what I would become, that this would be part of my priesthood, is that I could fix things. I was really amused by, some years ago, the concept, this campaign of it gets better. If you've heard it gets better. Come out, it gets better. I began to entertain some conversations with my family, despite all of the reasons that I would have not to do that. And what I found initially is that this became a very warm and welcoming enterprise, that my family was very enthusiastic to speak with me again, very, very happy to know what I was doing. And I thought that that would be something that would be very healing. It felt that way. But the world is gorgeous, tender, broken, dangerous. The story I want to share with you about this is along the way, something happened. I kept finishing school. I kept finishing courses. My questions got bigger and bigger and bigger. My understanding of my own relationship with God and my faith changed. And those questions became slightly larger than the ones that we could have over the phone. What they turned into were slightly awkward in-person gatherings and those strange conversations you might see depicted in television commercials over Thanksgiving dinner. Don't bring big questions to holidays. Right? What I will never forget is one particular memory. During my second year in seminary, what's called the Midler year, I was preparing for what's called the Midler Review. This is a time when all your professors that you have asked to sit in a room, very intimidating, along with the dean and others, sit down and review your performance and tell you whether they think this is working out or not, essentially. So no pressure. But I was excited because for the first time in my life, it felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. doing exactly what I needed to be doing, a lot of clarity around that for me. And so the night before that Midler review, I called home and spoke with my parents about all the things that were happening and the questions that I had to bring. And it was during that phone call that I think for my parents, they realized that what I was doing was something that they couldn't control anymore, that it had gotten out of their control, beyond what they were willing to understand or otherwise engage in. And this was around the same time that lots of other things were happening in my life. I was engaged. I was ready to be married. I was ready to be looking forward to what my call might look like, where I might be. We were talking about graduation. We were talking about all sorts of things that would be celebratory on that phone call, or at least what I thought would be. And what I will never forget is how that call ended. My mother, after letting me talk through all of these things silently on the phone, responded, "Well, honey, we are not coming to your graduation. We were excited for you to go to seminary, but we thought that you would learn that what you were doing was wrong. We are not coming to your wedding because you shouldn't be married. That's not right. We are not coming to your ordination because no one like you should be ordained." That call ended there. The world is gorgeous, tender, broken, dangerous. We know not why. I wonder if I can get this to work. Where in your life have you felt most isolated? And I want to give you a few minutes to talk through that question at your table. And I promise I won't leave it there, guys. I'm just building that up for you. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm aware that probably not all of you had a chance even to share your story at your table, but there will be hopefully some more time toward the end if you want to pick back up. So we all remember where we left off, right? I've asked you to reflect a little bit on this sense of isolation, of pain. This is something that Rabbi Bross talks about in her book, I think, very beautifully. She points to a reality that this is something that's just inherent to all of us. I've invited you in this space to think about your own story of isolation because it's apparent to me that everyone carries one. If you can't think of one when invited, come chat with me afterward. We should probably schedule some time. We all carry these things. But one of the things that we're taught, I think, in our world, in this moment perhaps particularly, is that these are things that we must not ever reveal. We cannot talk about them. We don't want to offend anyone. We don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. Am I right? So we tend to avoid them. And we focus in other areas. This is something that the book spoke about very clearly that resonated with me because it was part of how I was formed. But there at that moment in seminary, I think, is the time when everything for me changed. Because I can remember hanging up that phone and looking at my now husband, Joel, who is Jewish and not at all clear with family members that don't understand how you are just born. And I said to him, "You know, I think that my mother just told me that she didn't love me." And then we went on with our day. Later, after Joel went to work, because he was still a resident in the hospital, so thankfully he had to go to work so that I could have some time to sit alone and mope, I picked up the phone and called a good friend of mine who is also a priest, and I told him about what was happening. And interestingly, even though I expected great wisdom, what he said was, "I'll be there tomorrow." Okay, come see me. The next day was my Midler review. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. There's a concept in this book that has a couple of iterations. This was the one it landed on. It's the one that resonated with me as well. If you would fly in for the wedding, you better find a way to make it there for the funeral. My friend showed up the next day. Not only did he show up, but he invited himself to my Midler review, which he was not previously invited to. He sat there with all the privilege that I think maybe only male priests can have, right? In the room, asking questions as though he had been a part of my formation in this particular way, even though he hadn't, and he hadn't read those materials. He showed up when the right thing, the easy thing, would have been to retreat from that pain. Rabbi Bross says of grieving and rejoicing together and recognizing that even though we can't heal each other, we can and we must see each other. When the Midler review was done, my friend walked outside into the quad with me, and he said, "Whatever they tell you, whatever you have heard, know that you are called, and that is enough." And then we sat down, and he said that what is happening to you right now is the most painful thing that has ever happened to you. And I know you feel like everything is going to end, but it won't, and we will be here. That's insane. What a crazy thing for someone to tell someone else. I remember thinking how ludicrous that statement was. This is the issue, I think, that the book points us toward with grief, with isolation, with pain, is that when we are left to ourselves, we can't see a way forward. The only thing that makes sense is the grief that is in front of us. And that's why showing up matters. That's that first portion of this book. Sharing the stories that we have, the ones that we carry, invite other people into the story that we are building for ourselves. And Rabbi Bross talks about this. She says that seeing and being seen by each other, all of these things enhance our emotional health and deepen our sense of connectedness. They alter the physical and psychological landscape of a group and the people in it. Just showing up changes everything. It gives you a bit of a disconnect so that you can see something new. It didn't occur to me on that day that that person had flown across the country to be in a different place just to tell me something that I thought was ridiculous. It didn't occur to me until many days later. But it was those later days where I could see something totally different, a totally different way of recognizing the other people in my life that were showing up, that because of my acute pain and isolation, I couldn't see before. And that really saved my life, gave me a chance to see something totally different. And so my question for you is, when was the last time that you experienced pure delight? When did you last experience pure delight? Talk amongst yourselves. This one seems a little harder to break up. I wonder why. Thank you all for sharing a story of delight at your table. I ask you to reflect on these two questions because maybe especially now, in a season of reflection, of repentance, and one of the things that this book can perhaps help us do is to think about what balance looks like when we think about the concept of wonder. The stories that we carry, the ones of pain, of isolation, and joy and delight, are actually the same story, just from different angles. That the wholeness of sharing, of being together, is about having the ability to do both those things, not one or the other, not one leading to the other, but both of those things at the same time. And that the idea of being able to share that with people, sharing that wonder, is what makes all the difference. Rabbi Bross says that it is sometimes when we experience something wondrous, it doesn't feel real until we share it with someone else. It doesn't feel real. With all these stories that I've told you, I want to conclude it by saying that the delight that I began to discover, despite the pain I felt, was that there had always been a group of people waiting, literally waiting, to be a part of my life in the way that one would otherwise characterize a family's role. That there were people waiting to pick that up and to walk with me. It began that day that my friend flew to New Haven, Connecticut to sit in a room he wasn't invited to. It happened every day after that with new phone calls that finally I was given myself permission to answer and to engage with, to speak with people, to welcome them into my life in that way. These were the same group of people that helped me really sit with the pain of the story that had formed me, that had brought me to that place. These were the same people that helped me make a plan to reclaim what it was that was at my core. Despite the fact that seats are always in short supply at a graduation, these were the same people that helped me reserve seats for the parents that did not come, but there was a space for them. These were the same people that at my wedding helped reserve a table for the family that didn't come. The same people that helped reserve space in the church for my ordination for a family that didn't come. And in every scenario, these were the people seated next to those empty seats, filling that role. The same people that walked with me in those spaces, the ones that danced with me at my wedding and celebrated in pure delight. And also the same people that in the midst of every single occasion reflected on the fact that that was also a hard day, that in the midst of that joy, I must have been feeling immense pain, and acknowledge those things in such a deep way by doing it through the lens of what was in the moment. Rabbi Bross says we have to be there to receive someone's joy. It occurs to me in reflecting on my own story and on this book that you can't receive someone's joy until you can sit with them in what feels most painful, that you can acknowledge it, that you don't have to do anything to heal it because you can't, but all you can do is show up. I'll be there. I'll sit with you. I'll reserve seats because all of us, as this quote says, have to give people hope. And hope is all of this together because that is the dangerous and gorgeous and beautiful life that we have been given to live. And all of those stories, when someone walks with you, it changes who you are. It sends you to a more tender space where you can give and receive in the same way. I think this is what Lent is about, at least for me, is to discover in those quiet moments what it is that resonates, to be prepared to receive what it is that comes from the people around you and to engage with it thoughtfully. I laughed the other day at church, a dear parishioner here I met at the door on a Sunday and said, "Good morning." And they said, "Good morning." And then I said, "How are you?" She said, "Well, barely hanging on." but thanks for asking. Sometimes all it takes is to listen and then to engage. For me to stop and go back and go, whoa, 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 whoa. Barely hanging on. Now I got to hear about that. These are the things I think we're called to. This is the only thing I think that we discover. This is what redemption really looks like, at least for me. And I'll ask you what that means for you. That's what a journey through this time of reflection means. And you have the job to give people hope. Not to diminish, but to acknowledge, to sit, to stay when everyone else leaves, because that is how we find freedom. That's what hope really is. So, the last question I have for you is, what is the good news you have to share today? Thank you for your time.